All right, guys, so here we are in the last push of the chapter where we will be addressing or looking at activity-based costing method. All right, so before we get into the details of this, where we've been before is we've looked at the single plant-wide rate method, and then we've also looked at the multiple production, yeah, you get what I'm saying, the multiple production department factory overhead rate method, right? And we talked about in the last video about, product cost distortion and all of that good stuff and how that could significantly impact the cost associated with the cost that you assign to your product, right? And what we have also done is we've looked at the spectrum of product costing, right? So right now, if we're on this spectrum, I would say the single plant wide rate method is here, and then you have the multiple here, and then here is where you have ABC, right? So I'm gonna on this spectrum, I'm gonna say it goes from simple to more detailed. Okay. So the ABC or the activity-based costing method is the most detailed costing system allocation, the most detailed factory overhead costing system out of all three methods, okay? It just further reduces the possibility of product cost distortion, right? Because it's doing time studies, and I'll get into that in a second. But it is the most detailed one. So activity-based costing, it looks at it's just an alternative approach, and it looks at all of the different types of activities or work that's being done for a product. Okay. So for example, when we're looking at the multiple factory overhead rates, it was just based on maybe the different departments such as assembly, inspection, and things like that. However, on the ABC, you're looking at so many different variables like machine usage, inspection, moving, production setups, engineering activities, and the works, okay? So what that looks like, if I'm comparing, is the multiple production department method. You see here, we had it divvied out into fabrication and assembly. But here under ABC, you see now what there's so many different activities, and each activity contributes to the final makeup of the product. So that's what we're going to look at now. All right, so let's assume that the following activities have been identified for producing snowmobiles and riding mowers for Ruiz Company. So we have the fabrication department, which we have already looked at. They are cutting the metal to shape it, and this one is more machine intensive. And then we've also looked at the assembly department, and this one is where they manually assemble the machines, and this one is labor intensive. Then we have a couple of new departments, or sorry, a couple of new activities, such as setup. So this is each time you run a new production, what's the time required to set it up. We also have quality control inspection. So usually part of the process of manufacturing a process is you're gonna do some kind of inspection to make sure that it meets the specifications of the product. And then lastly, you have engineering changes. So engineering changes consist of changes in designs or improvements, so forth and so on. All right. So with that, we still have that $1.6 million at hand, right? So think back to when we started with our single plant wide rate method, we had this 1.6 million. But now we have added all the different activities required to make this product, right? This is only talking about their factory overhead. And so what you see now is it's now being even more so divvied up or defined, right? It's no longer one category or two departments. Now you have all of these different activities to account for the work, okay? So that was my comparison to the multiple production method. All right, so let's talk about how do we now allocate rates using the ABC method. So let's assume that the snowmobile is Ruiz's newest product, right? And engineers are still making minor changes. So Ruiz has the following information, okay? All right, so what I would say about the ABC method is it is the most elaborate and time consuming one, but again, it is the most accurate one at that. Okay. So we're saying that when here's your snowmobile and your riding mower, and they're saying that, hey, if I'm gonna produce a snowmobile, I'm gonna need 1,000. They're going to produce 1,000 units. You're going to need 100 setups, 100 inspections, and then 12 engineering changes. And then for the riding mower, it's still 1,000 units that they're going to produce. They're going to do 20 setups for inspections. But what you should see here now is that the engineering changes are not as significant because, again, maybe this is an older product for the company, right? They're more familiar with it. So then this is more information that you need that was already provided in another part of this chapter when we're looking at departments. But each of these, the snowmobile and riding mower must also go through the fabrication department and assembly department. So we're adding to the mix, okay? So not only do they have to go through these departments, but then we also have to not only do they have to go through the fabrication department and assembly department, but they also have to go through setups, quality inspection, and any kind of engineering changes, right? So we have made this process more detailed. All right, so here it is, all of our different activities for both the snowmobile and the riding mower, right? Each of these products, as I mentioned before, has to go through all of these processes before it becomes its final product, right? So what I mean by that is maybe, for instance, we take the snowmobile. The snowmobile has to go through the fabrication department, the assembly department, set up, quality inspection, and engineering changes, okay? And so forth with the riding mower. Right. All right, so moving on. So how do we figure out the rates, right? So we're going to do exactly what we did in prior examples, but this one, again, is a little more detail. We're going to take all of our factory overhead that we have budgeted or forecasted, and now we're going to, like for instance, fabrication. The budgeted factory overhead is $530,000. Now we need to divide that by the activity base for fabrication. All right, so what does that look like? Well, what we're going to do now is take each of our departments and divide it by the total activity base. So what I mean by that is, for instance, our fabrication department, it has a total of $530,000 in cost. And then we're going to divide it by our total activity-based usage, which is 10,000 direct labor hours. And then we're going to do the same thing for assembly, because first we need to figure out the rate. And once we figure out the rate, we can apply it to each of the products. Then we do the same thing for the assembly department, right? The assembly department is 70,000 in cost, right? I'm getting that from here. And then the total is 10,000 hours. Okay, so I'm going to calculate that. That should be, what, $7? And then last but not least, let's take, for example, setup, but you're going to do it for all of them. But for setup, the total is here, 400. So setup, the total was 480,000, and you're going to divide that by the 120. Oops, I'm running out of space, but you're going to divide that by the total, right? And so you're going to get the rates for each of the activities, and then you're going to apply the rates very similar to what we've done before. So let's see what this all looks like. So of course I wrote all this, but I've done it already. All right. So take a second and look through this, but this is exactly what I was explaining. So you have each of the departments, like the fabrication department, you have the assembly department. So you have all of your different activities. I shouldn't say departments. You have all of your different activities, right? And now you are allocating, here's their costs, which we got from here. And then here's the total usage. We're not going to divvy it up by product yet, but here's all of their usage, right? Total usage. And then here's all of the rates. Now from there, you're going to go apply those rates to each of the products. So for instance, you have your snowmobile, right? Here's your snowmobile, and then here's all of the activities, right? And then we said for each, here's the activities for the snowmobile, the rates that we've already calculated, and then here's your total. And then you do the same thing for the riding mobile, right? All of this information is coming from here. It's kind of a little messy, sorry guys. But all of that information is coming from these specific lines now, okay? All right, so here we have, and then once you figure out the rates never change, right? These are the rates no matter what. And so then we calculate all of the activity costs for just riding more, okay? All right, so I'll come back to the comparison, but what I want you guys to do now is take a second to go through the breakout session. And again, the best way to go through this is to really practice it, because there's a lot of steps in between. So I want to make sure you get this before we move on. So in the next video, we'll walk through this example together.